He was a veteran Navy SEAL, standing in front of his father's house, but no longer welcome inside with nothing left but an old backpack and a loyal German shepherd by his side. No home, no direction, just a road leading into the unknown. Then he found something strange. A listing for an abandoned forge in the forest. For just $10. It didn't look like a second chance. It looked like a mistake. But his dog stopped and refused to walk away. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories. Caleb Rourke stood on the cracked wooden porch of the house he had grown up in and realized, with a kind of quiet finality, that it was no longer his. He did not knock. He did not call out. There was no point. The front door stood shut, the curtains drawn tight behind the glass, as if the house itself had chosen not to see him. At his feet sat a cardboard box, creased at the corners, damp from the morning dew. Inside were the fragments of a life someone had already decided to erase. A folded flannel shirt, worn boots, a few tools, and a leather-bound notebook that smelled faintly of oil and iron. A note had been taped to the door. No signature, no explanation. There was just a single line written in hurried, slanted handwriting. Don't come back. Caleb didn't reach for the handle again. He already knew it would be locked. At 43, Caleb was a man shaped by discipline and distance. He stood tall, just over 6 feet, broad-shouldered, with the kind of lean, hardened muscle that came not from gyms, but from years of carrying weight where weight was never meant to be carried. His face was all angles and quiet tension. A strong jaw, faint lines etched deep around his mouth, and a layer of short, uneven stubble that never quite turned into a full beard. His eyes, blue-gray, like storm clouds over cold water, held the kind of stillness that unsettled people who weren't used to silence. His hair was cut short, military style, dark brown threaded with early silver at the temples. Not vanity, just habit. Practical, clean, controlled. He wore the same thing he always wore. An olive field jacket faded at the seams, a red and dark blue plaid shirt underneath, dark cargo pants, and worn brown leather boots that had outlasted more places than most men ever saw. On his wrist, an old military watch, scratched, reliable, still ticking. Beside him stood Ranger. The German shepherd didn't look at the house. That was the first thing Caleb noticed. Ranger stood slightly off to the side, his body angled, not toward the door, not toward the box, but toward the distant line of trees beyond the gravel road. His coat was black and tan, short and dense, muscles coiled beneath it like tension waiting to be released. His ears were upright, alert. His eyes, sharp, focused, were fixed on something far away. Not a sound, not a movement, just watching. Ranger was 5, maybe 6 years old. A working line K9. Trained for detection, for patrol, for war. He had seen the same things Caleb had seen, though in a different language, one of scent, instinct, and silent understanding. He didn't panic. He didn't hesitate. But when something mattered, he stopped. Caleb followed his gaze, but saw nothing except trees and distance. Nothing out there, he muttered. Ranger didn't move. Caleb exhaled slowly. Yeah, he added under his breath. Maybe there is. He bent down, picked up the box, and turned away from the house without looking back. He had done this before. Not like this, but close enough. You learned eventually that doors didn't always close loudly. Sometimes they closed in silence, and that was worse. Arthur Bell's place sat at the edge of town, where the pavement gave way to gravel, and the gravel gave way to land that hadn't been told what to do yet. The house was small, single-story, with peeling paint and a sagging porch that leaned slightly to the left, like an old man favoring one leg. Behind it stood a cluttered yard filled with tools, rusted equipment, and half-finished repairs. evidence of a life spent fixing things that other people had given up on. Arthur himself opened the door before Caleb could knock. He was in his late 70s, tall but slightly bent at the shoulders, like time had pressed down just enough to leave a mark. His hair was thin and silver, cut short without much care, and his face was lined deeply, not just with age, but with years of weather, work, and quiet observation. His eyes, however, were clear, steady, the kind that missed very little. He wore a faded brown canvas jacket over a flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up, hands stained with grease that no amount of washing ever fully removed. He looked at Caleb once, then at the box, then at Ranger. "About time you showed up," Arthur said, stepping aside. "Took you longer than I expected." Caleb gave a faint, humorless smile. "Was hoping I wouldn't have to." Arthur nodded. "Yeah, that's usually how it goes." He didn't ask questions, didn't need to. Inside, the house smelled like coffee and old wood. Simple. Lived in. Real. Arthur pointed down the hallway. "Spare room's yours. Needs a window fixed, and the heater sticks sometimes. You fix those, we'll call it even." Caleb set the box down. "I can do that." "I know." Ranger stepped inside last, scanning the room in a slow, deliberate sweep before settling near the doorway. He lay down, but not fully relaxed. One ear remained tilted toward the outside, always listening. Days fell into a rhythm. Caleb worked. Fences, broken hinges, tractor parts that had given up years ago. He moved through tasks with quiet efficiency, hands remembering what his mind didn't always want to revisit. He welded when needed, repaired what he could, replaced what he couldn't. Arthur didn't hover. He watched. Sometimes he'd hand Caleb a tool before it was asked for. Sometimes he'd say nothing at all. At night, Caleb sat on the edge of the narrow bed in the spare room, staring at nothing in particular. The silence there was different from the silence he carried. Less heavy. Less haunted. Still, it left space. And space was dangerous. Ranger often lay at his feet, head resting on his boots, breathing slow and steady. A grounding presence. A reminder that something in the world still moved forward, one breath at a time. It was late one night when it happened. The house was quiet. Arthur had gone to bed hours ago. The only light came from a small lamp on the nightstand, casting a soft yellow glow across the room. Yet Caleb sat hunched forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. He didn't remember how long he'd been sitting like that. Time didn't always behave the way it was supposed to anymore. Ranger shifted. Not restlessly, deliberately. The dog stood, walked over to the corner where Caleb had placed the box, and nudged it with his nose. Once. Twice. Then, more firmly. Caleb frowned slightly. Not now. Ranger didn't stop. Instead, he placed one paw on the edge of the box, and then, slowly, pressed down on something inside. Caleb exhaled sharply. All right. He reached over, pulled the box closer, and opened it again. The smell hit him first. Oil, metal, memory. He moved the clothes aside and found the notebook. Old leather. Edges worn smooth from years of use. He hadn't opened it since the funeral. Didn't think he needed to. Didn't think he wanted to. Ranger sat beside him, watching. Not the notebook, but Caleb. Waiting. Caleb ran his thumb along the edge of the cover, then opened it. Inside were pages filled with sketches, measurements, notes written in a careful, deliberate hand. His father's handwriting. Diagrams of metal joints, heat markings. Notes about how different alloys behaved under stress. Observations about fire. How it changed things, how it revealed weaknesses, how it could make something stronger or destroy it entirely. Caleb turned another page, then another. He hadn't realized how much he remembered, or how much he had forgotten, Ranger suddenly stood up again, this time sharper. His body stiffened, ears forward, eyes locked. Not on the notebook, but on Caleb. Then slowly, deliberately, Ranger lowered his head and pressed his nose against the open page, right on a line Caleb hadn't read yet. Caleb blinked. What? He leaned closer. The line read, "Find the place where the work was left unfinished." That's where it begins again. Caleb stared at the words. A strange, quiet chill ran through him. Not fear, not quite recognition. Something in between. Ranger didn't move, didn't blink, just held his position, as if that line mattered more than anything else. Caleb leaned back slowly. "Yeah," he murmured. "Easy for you to say." But something had shifted, just slightly. He closed the notebook, but didn't put it away. Instead, he reached for the old laptop sitting on the small desk by the wall. It took a moment to boot up. The screen flickered once, then steadied. Caleb hesitated, then typed, "Cheap property, Northern Maine, abandoned results loaded slowly. Most of them useless." Then, one listing caught his eye. It was buried halfway down the page. No images, just text. Abandoned blacksmith shop. Rural forest land. County surplus. Unclaimed. Minimum bid, $10. Caleb stared at the screen. Behind him, Ranger shifted. Just slightly, not excited, not restless, just aware. Caleb leaned back in the chair, eyes still on the listing. A blacksmith shop. He had never worked a forge, but he knew metal. He knew heat. He knew what it meant to take something broken and try to make it hold again. Outside, the wind moved softly through the trees. Inside, the room felt different. Not full. Not empty. Just waiting. Caleb closed the laptop halfway. $10, he muttered. Ranger lay back down, but his eyes didn't close. For the first time in a long while, Caleb didn't feel like he was standing at the end of something. And it felt, quietly, like the beginning of something he didn't understand yet. And somewhere, far beyond the walls of that small house, something else was waiting too. The gravel road ended long before the forest did. Caleb parked Arthur's old pickup beside a rusted signpost that leaned at an angle, its lettering almost erased by years of wind and weather. Beyond it, there was no road, only a narrow path cut through pine and birch, barely wide enough for a man to walk without brushing against branches. He stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The air smelled clean, sharp with resin and cold sunlight. Somewhere deeper in the woods, a stream moved quietly over stone. Ranger jumped down beside him without being told. The German shepherd paused immediately, nose lifting into the air. His body went still. Not tense, not aggressive, but alert in a way that meant he was processing something beyond sight. Caleb adjusted the strap of his pack. That's as far as the truck goes. Ranger didn't respond. He was already looking ahead. The walk took nearly 40 minutes, not because of distance, but because of silence. It was the kind of silence Caleb knew well. Not empty, not peaceful, just aware. Like the forest was watching back, waiting to see what kind of man had come this far. Ranger led most of the way, not pulling, not rushing, just choosing a line through the trees with quiet certainty, his paws landing softly, deliberately. Every few minutes, he would pause, turn his head slightly, and listen. Once, he stopped completely. Ears forward, body angled toward something unseen. Caleb followed his gaze. Nothing, just trees. "Keep moving," Caleb said, low. Ranger hesitated, then obeyed, but not before taking one last look into the deeper woods. The clearing revealed itself slowly. At first it was only a thinning of trees, a break in shadow. Then sunlight opened up in a wide, pale stretch, and the structure stood at the far end, still, patient, as if it had always been there and had no intention of leaving. The forge. It wasn't large, but it was solid, and the walls were darkened wood, weathered to a deep brown that nearly blended with the forest behind it. The roof sloped steeply, missing a few shingles but holding its shape. A tall brick chimney rose from one side, blackened from years of fire that had once burned hot enough to leave marks no rain could wash away. The front door was a sliding barn-style panel on an iron track, slightly crooked, like it had been opened once too many times and never properly fixed. There were no signs of collapse. No signs of recent damage. Just time. Caleb stood at the edge of the clearing, studying it. "This is it," he said quietly. Ranger didn't move forward. Instead, the dog circled wide to the left, keeping distance from the structure. His nose worked constantly, scanning the ground, the air, the wind itself. His tail remained low, not fearful, but cautious. Then he stopped, right in front of the door, 3 feet away, and did nothing. Caleb frowned slightly. "Go on." Ranger didn't. He took 1 step forward, stopped, stepped back, then forward again. A pattern, once, twice, 3 times, the exact same motion. Caleb's expression changed. Not alarmed, not confused, but attentive. "That's not random," he murmured. Ranger's ears flicked at the sound of his voice, but his eyes never left the door. Caleb approached slowly, and each step felt heavier than it should have. Not physically, but something about the space pressed inward, like the clearing held its breath. He reached for the door handle. Cold metal. He hesitated, then pulled. The track protested, a long scraping groan that echoed across the clearing like something waking up unwillingly. Dust shook loose from the top rail, falling in thin streams of gray. The door slid open just enough. Darkness waited inside. Not deep, not endless, but enough. Caleb stepped in first. Ranger followed, but only after a brief pause. Inside, the air was different. Still, dry, heavy with the scent of old iron and burned coal. The space opened into a single room. No walls dividing it. No modern additions, just the raw, functional layout of a place built for one purpose. The forge sat slightly off-center, brick, square, blackened with soot. The fire pot was filled with hardened ash, untouched for decades. A wooden bellows system hung beside it, cracked but intact. The anvil stood nearby, massive, mounted on a thick oak stump. Caleb walked toward it without thinking. He reached out, brushed his hand across the surface, and then, almost instinctively, tapped it lightly with his knuckle. A faint ring echoed through the room. Not loud, but clear. Alive. Caleb exhaled slowly. "Still good," he said. Ranger moved past him, deeper into the room. The dog's behavior shifted again. No longer cautious at the door. Now, searching. He moved along the walls, nose close to the ground, then lifted it to scent the air again. His path wasn't random. It curved inward, then outward, then back again, as if mapping something invisible. Caleb let him work. He turned instead to the tools that remained. A pair of tongs hung from a peg, rusted but salvageable. A broken hammerhead lay near the wall, missing its handle. A leather apron, stiff with age, hung like a shadow of the man who had once worn it. Elias Boone. Caleb didn't know the man, but he could read him, the way he read other operators in the field, the way tools were placed, and the way space was used. The forge wasn't abandoned in panic. It was closed. Deliberately. That meant something. A sharp sound cut through the stillness. Not loud, but sudden. Wood against wood. Caleb turned instantly. Ranger had stopped near the back of the forge, one paw raised, pressed against the floor. Then, 3 deliberate scratches. Paws, 3 scratches again. Same spot, same rhythm. Caleb's chest tightened slightly. Ranger. The dog didn't look at him. He scratched again, not digging, not tearing, pointing. Caleb stepped closer. Something about that exact spot felt wrong, and the floor beneath Ranger's paw looked like the rest. Packed earth, darkened with years of ash and metal dust, but when Caleb crouched down and ran his hand across it, he felt it. A difference. Subtle. A shift in texture. Like something beneath the surface had been disturbed, then carefully smoothed over. He pressed harder. The ground didn't give, but the sensation lingered. Not solid, not entirely. Caleb leaned back on his heels, eyes narrowing. He glanced toward the forge itself, then toward the rear wall. Distance, spacing, it didn't match, not quite. Most forges were built close to the back wall, to conserve heat, to save space. This one wasn't. There was too much room. Caleb stood slowly. Someone changed something, he murmured. Ranger finally turned his head. Their eyes met, and for a moment, there was no doubt in Caleb's mind. The dog wasn't guessing. He was remembering something in a way humans couldn't. Caleb stepped back from the spot, not because he was afraid, because he understood timing. Whatever had been hidden here had waited a long time. It wasn't going anywhere. He exhaled slowly and looked around the room again, this time differently. Not as a visitor, as someone who might stay. Not today, he said quietly. Ranger lowered his paw, but didn't leave the spot immediately. Only after Caleb turned away did the dog follow. They stepped back outside into the clearing. The light felt brighter now, the air easier to breathe. Caleb pulled the door shut behind them. The metal track groaned again, sealing the space in a way that felt almost respectful. He stood there for a moment, staring at the building. $10, he muttered. Ranger sat beside him, not relaxed, not tense, just present. Caleb ran a hand over the back of the dog's neck. You knew, didn't you? No answer, just a slow blink. On the walk back, Caleb didn't speak much. His mind wasn't empty anymore. That was the problem. Something had shifted. Not dramatic, not obvious, but enough. The kind of shift that came before decisions, before changes, before things started moving again. Behind them, the forge stood quiet in the clearing, unchanged, unmoved, but no longer forgotten. That night, back at Arthur's house, Caleb didn't open the notebook. He didn't need to. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands instead, hands that had held rifles, carried weight, broken things, fixed things, survived. Ranger lay at his feet, still, watching, waiting. Caleb exhaled. Yeah, he said quietly. I saw it too. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, soft, steady, like something breathing. For the first time since he had left the house that was no longer his, Caleb didn't feel lost. He felt unsettled and strangely certain that whatever was buried in that place hadn't been waiting for just anyone. Caleb didn't sleep much that night, not because of fear, because of precision. There was a difference. Fear made a man restless. Precision made him still. Too still sometimes. It forced the mind to replay details over and over again, searching for patterns that didn't quite line up. And that forge didn't line up. He lay on the narrow bed in Arthur's spare room, staring at the ceiling, the dim light from the window casting faint shadows across the cracked plaster. Ranger lay on the floor beside him, unmoving, but not asleep. Caleb knew the difference in the rhythm of the dog's breathing. Spacing was off, Caleb muttered quietly. No response. Back wall should have been closer to the forge. Ranger shifted slightly. That was enough. Caleb exhaled and swung his legs off the bed. Yeah, I saw it. By first light, they were already on the road. Arthur stood on the porch, arms crossed, watching them load the truck. He didn't ask questions, but this time, his eyes lingered longer than usual. You going back out there? Arthur asked. Caleb nodded. Arthur scratched his jaw slowly. That place been empty a long time. I noticed. Arthur tilted his head slightly, studying Caleb. You don't usually go back to places that don't make sense. Caleb reached for the truck door. Maybe I'm starting to. Arthur gave a quiet grunt, half approval, half warning. Take tools, he said. Not just your hands. The forest looked different in the morning, less mysterious, more honest. Light filtered through the tall pines in long golden shafts, touching the ground in broken patterns. The path felt shorter this time, not because it was, but because Caleb walked it with purpose. Ranger stayed close, closer than before, not scouting ahead, not drifting wide, right at Caleb's side. The forge stood exactly as they had left it. Still, silent, waiting. Caleb didn't hesitate this time. He slid the door open fully, the metal track groaning in protest before settling into place. A dust lifted again, drifting in the air like something disturbed after too long. Inside, nothing had changed. But Caleb had. He walked straight to the back of the forge. No detours, no second guesses. Ranger moved ahead of him and stopped exactly where he had the day before. No scratching this time, no circling. Just stillness, as if saying, you already know. Caleb crouched low, eyes scanning the ground first. Packed earth, darkened by years of ash and iron. But now that he knew what to look for, he saw it. Not a mark, not a crack, a difference in compression, a section that had been disturbed once, and then forced back into place, carefully, intentionally. And Caleb ran his fingers across it again, then stood, slowly. His gaze shifted upward, to the wall. Up close, the wood told a different story. The boards were the same color at a glance, but not under scrutiny. Some had been aged differently, faded unevenly. The grain ran slightly off compared to the others. Caleb pressed one palm flat against the surface. Solid, but not fixed. He moved his hand along the seam and found it. A barely noticeable gap where two boards met the floor. Too clean, too deliberate. He leaned his weight forward and pushed. Nothing. He tried again, harder this time. The wood didn't give. But it didn't resist the way it should have. Caleb stepped back. Hidden, he said quietly. Ranger's ears twitched. Caleb pulled the small pry tool from his pack, something Arthur had insisted he take. The metal edge slid into the narrow seam with just enough resistance to confirm what Caleb already knew. This wasn't decay. This was design. He applied pressure. Slow, controlled. The first sound was almost nothing. A soft shift, like wood remembering it had once moved. Then, a click. Subtle, but unmistakable. Caleb froze, listened. Nothing else followed. No collapse, no crack, just silence. He pushed again. This time the board gave, not much, just enough. Ranger moved suddenly. Not toward Caleb, not toward the door. He stepped forward and placed himself between Caleb and the opening. Body rigid, ears forward, eyes locked on the space behind the shifting boards. A low sound rumbled in his chest, not a growl of aggression, but recognition. Caleb had heard that sound before, in places where danger wasn't new, where it had been there, waiting. "Easy," Caleb said softly. Ranger didn't move. For a moment, time stretched thin. Then, slowly, the dog stepped aside. But he didn't relax, not even close. Caleb pushed the boards inward. 3 of them moved together, swinging open on hidden hinges that had somehow survived decades without rusting into uselessness. Behind them, darkness, not deep, not endless, but contained. A space no larger than a small closet, sealed off from the rest of the structure. The air inside was different. Drier, preserved. Caleb waited a moment before stepping closer. Experience had taught him that hidden spaces were never just empty. He crouched down and reached inside. His hand brushed against wood. Not the wall, a crate. He pulled it out slowly, muscles tightening slightly as the weight shifted into his arms. Heavy. He set it down on the floor in front of him. The lid creaked as he opened it. Inside. Metal. Tools. Not rusted scrap. Not leftovers. Crafted, balanced, used, and cared for. Hammers of different shapes, each with subtle variations in head weight and angle. The handles were worn smooth, not by time alone, but by repetition. Years of hands gripping the same points. Caleb picked one up, felt the weight, turned it slightly in his grip. And for the first time since entering the forge, his expression changed. Respect. He reached into the compartment again, another crate, then another, each one filled with more than just objects. Purpose, intent, a lifetime of work, hidden away instead of discarded. One crate held smaller tools, chisels, punches, files wrapped carefully in cloth that had protected them from moisture. Another held raw material, steel billets, untouched, waiting. Then, a smaller container, leather, worn. Caleb opened it carefully. Inside were coins, gold, old, not polished, not displayed, stored. His jaw tightened slightly, not because of the value, because of the decision behind it. Someone had hidden these on purpose, not for theft, for preservation. At the bottom of the compartment, pressed flat beneath everything else, was a single envelope. Caleb didn't open it immediately. He stared at it for a long moment instead. Ranger had moved closer again, his posture slightly lowered now, but still alert, still aware. Caleb picked up the envelope, ran his thumb along the edge, then slid it open. Inside, a letter, handwritten. The ink had faded slightly, but the words remained clear. Caleb read silently, and as he did, something in his chest shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly, but deeply. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. No rush, no reaction, just understanding. He sat back on his heels, the open compartment behind him, the tools spread across the floor. Ranger lowered himself beside him, resting one paw lightly against Caleb's boot. Grounding, steady. Caleb looked around the forge again, same walls, same floor, same air. But it wasn't the same place anymore. It couldn't be, because now he knew this place hadn't been abandoned. It had been left behind, for someone. He exhaled slowly, then said, almost to himself, "Guess I'm not leaving." Ranger didn't move, didn't need to. The letter didn't leave Caleb's hand for a long time. He didn't read it again, didn't need to. Some words didn't sit in your mind. They settled somewhere deeper, where logic stopped trying to explain things. Caleb stood slowly inside the forge, the folded paper still between his fingers. Around him, the room felt different now. Not changed in shape or structure, but in meaning. Every tool, every mark on the floor, every worn edge carried weight. Not abandonment. Continuation. Ranger had already shifted away from the open compartment. The German Shepherd lay near the doorway now, body angled outward, watching the clearing beyond, as if the job inside was no longer his responsibility, and his ears flicked occasionally at distant sounds. But his posture had relaxed just enough to signal something Caleb had come to recognize. We found it. Now it was up to him. Caleb crouched again beside the scattered tools. He picked up one of the hammers, heavier than the others, its head slightly broader, the handle worn smooth, in a way that told a story of repetition, not neglect. He turned it in his hand, balanced. Whoever had made this hadn't guessed. They had learned. Caleb set it down gently and reached for another crate. Inside were notebooks, thick, weathered, bound with twine that had gone stiff with age. He untied one carefully and opened it. The pages were filled edge to edge. Measurements, angles, notes written in tight, deliberate handwriting. Elias Boone. Caleb could see the man in the lines. The patience, the discipline, the refusal to waste effort on anything that didn't matter. This wasn't a hobbyist's journal. This was a working record of a life spent shaping metal into something that lasted. He flipped through slowly. Hooks, hinges, blades, repairs. Nothing extravagant, everything necessary. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, brushing through the trees with a low whisper. It carried into the forge through the open doorway, stirring dust and ash just enough to make the air feel alive again. Caleb stood and walked toward the forge itself. The firepot sat in the center, cold, filled with hardened remnants of coal and ash that had fused together over time. He reached down and brushed the surface with his fingers. Dry, brittle, dead, but not gone. He stepped back, scanning the rest of the setup. The bellows system, old but intact. The flue still open. The chimney darkened, but standing. It would work. Not perfectly, not easily, but it would work. Caleb exhaled slowly. You left it ready, he said under his breath. Not for use, for return. Footsteps sounded behind him. Not Rangers, lighter, careful. Caleb turned instantly, body shifting before thought caught up. A figure stood just outside the doorway. A woman, mid-30s, maybe a few years younger than that. She stood about 5'7", with a lean, practical build that suggested someone used to walking long distances and carrying her own weight. Her hair was chestnut brown, pulled into a low tie at the back of her neck, a few loose strands catching the light. Her skin was fair, but weathered slightly by time spent outdoors, not fragile, but lived in. She wore a moss-green parka, unzipped over a gray sweater, with dark outdoor pants and sturdy boots that had seen real use. A small pack hung from one shoulder. Her eyes were steady, curious, but not intrusive. You're Caleb Rourke, she said. Not a question. Caleb straightened. Depends who's asking. She stepped forward into the doorway, careful not to cross fully inside. Grace Whitaker, she said. Town office. Caleb nodded once. Figured I'd see you again. Grace's gaze moved past him, taking in the forge, the tools laid out on the ground, the open compartment partially hidden behind him. She didn't comment on it, not directly. Word travels, she said. You bought the place. Didn't think you'd come out this fast. Caleb shrugged slightly. Didn't have a reason not to. Grace tilted her head just a fraction, studying him, not skeptically, but thoughtfully. Most people do, she said quietly. Ranger stood now, moving closer to Caleb, but positioning himself slightly forward. Not aggressive, not blocking, just present. Grace noticed. Military? She asked, glancing at the dog. Both of us, Caleb replied. Grace nodded once, as if that answered more than the words themselves. She stepped a little further in, boots brushing lightly against the packed earth floor. "This place," she began, trailing off as she looked around. "It's been sitting longer than anyone expected." "Why?" Caleb asked. Grace folded her arms loosely. "Because it never fell apart." Caleb raised an eyebrow slightly. "Everything else out here does," she continued. "Barns collapse, cabins rot, roofs cave in. But this one," she gestured around them, "it just stayed." Ranger suddenly moved again, not toward the door, not toward Grace. He turned his head sharply toward the forge, toward the fire pot, and let out a single, low exhale. Not a bark, not a growl. A breath, as if reacting to something that wasn't visible. Grace froze mid-sentence. "You feel that?" she asked quietly. Caleb didn't answer immediately, because for just a second, the air near the forge had shifted. Warmer, not by much, not enough to explain, but enough to notice. Ranger's eyes stayed fixed on the fire pot, unblinking. Then it was gone, just air again, still, empty. Grace exhaled slowly. "Weird place, T," she muttered. Caleb's gaze lingered a moment longer before he turned back. "Yeah," he said. "Starting to think that's the point." Grace cleared her throat slightly, grounding herself. "Elias Boone," she said. "You found anything that belongs to him?" Caleb considered the question, then nodded toward the tools. "Left enough." Grace stepped closer, crouching near one of the hammers. She didn't touch it, just studied it with quiet respect. "My grandfather used to talk about him," she said. "Said Boone never wasted time. Didn't make things to sell, made things to last." Caleb glanced at the notebooks. Seems like he kept records of everything. Grace smiled faintly. "Of course he did." They stood in silence for a moment. Then Grace straightened. "There's no power out here," she said. "No water line either. County won't run it this far. Too expensive." "I figured." "You planning on staying?" Caleb didn't answer immediately. He looked around again, the forge, the tools, the open space that no longer felt empty. Then at Ranger. The dog had settled again, calm now, but watchful. Always watchful. Caleb nodded once. "Yeah," he said. "I think I am." Grace studied him for a long moment, then gave a small nod. "All right," she said. "Then you should know. People around here will notice. Good or bad. Depends what you do next." She turned to leave, pausing at the doorway. "If you're serious about this place," she added, glancing back over her shoulder, "don't rush it." Caleb frowned slightly. "Why?" Grace's expression softened just enough to hint at something unspoken. "Because some things out here don't like being woken up too fast." Then she stepped out into the clearing and was gone. The forge fell quiet again, but not the same quiet as before. Caleb walked back to the fire pot slowly. He stood over it, staring down into the cold ash, his reflection barely visible in the dark surface. "Ah, you wanted it lit," he said quietly. No answer, just silence. Caleb set the letter carefully on a nearby work surface, then rolled up his sleeves. Not all the way, just enough. Ranger lifted his head slightly, watching. Caleb didn't reach for the tools yet, didn't start the fire, didn't move anything. He just stood there, breathing, feeling, waiting. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't trying to survive something, he was about to begin something. The first fire didn't burn the way Caleb expected it to. It started slow, reluctant, like something that had forgotten what it meant to live. The kindling caught, then faltered. The coal resisted, refusing to take heat evenly, Smoke curled low instead of rising clean through the chimney, lingering in the air like a memory that didn't want to leave. Caleb adjusted the bellows, pumping steady, controlled breaths of air into the fire pot. His movements were precise, economical, trained. But this wasn't a rifle. It wasn't a system designed for consistency. Fire didn't follow orders. It answered patience. Ranger lay near the doorway, head resting on his paws, eyes half-lidded but never unfocused. Every few seconds, the dog's gaze flicked toward Caleb, then back to the outside world, maintaining a balance between watchfulness and trust. Caleb wiped sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. "Too much air," he muttered. He adjusted again. The flame steadied. Not perfect, but alive. The first piece of steel didn't survive. Caleb heated it too long, too hot. The color shifted past workable orange into something dull and brittle. When he struck it on the anvil, it didn't shape. It fractured. The sound was wrong, flat, dead. Caleb stared at the ruined piece for a long moment before setting it aside. He didn't curse, didn't react, just reached for another. Days passed, then more. Time blurred into effort. Caleb worked through failure like he had worked through worse things in his life. Quietly, without complaint, without drama. But this was different. Out there, failure got you killed. Here, it just stayed. Bent steel, cracked edges, warped shapes that refused to hold form. He made hooks that twisted wrong, hinges that didn't sit flush, blades that wouldn't keep an edge no matter how carefully he treated them. Every mistake stayed visible. There was no covering it, no hiding it. The first customer came 3 weeks later, a man named Daniel Pike. Late 50s, thick-built, shoulders worn down by decades of farm work. His face was broad, sunburned deep into the skin, with a short gray beard that grew uneven along his jaw. His hands were large, scarred, the kind that spoke more than his words ever would. He needed a simple gate hinge. "Nothing fancy," Daniel said, leaning against the workbench, eyes scanning the forge with quiet skepticism. "Just something that'll hold." Caleb nodded once. "I can do that." Daniel studied him for a moment longer, then glanced at Ranger. "That dog yours?" "Yeah." Daniel nodded again, as if that answered something he hadn't asked. Caleb worked the hinge carefully, measured, slower than before. He checked the angles twice, controlled the heat better, took breaks where needed. When he handed it over, he believed it would hold. That belief lasted 2 days. Daniel came back early in the morning. Didn't knock. Just walked into the clearing with the hinge in his hand, set it down on the workbench. "It failed," he said simply. No anger, no accusation, just truth. Caleb picked it up. The bend had warped under pressure. Not immediately, but enough. It wasn't good enough. Daniel scratched his beard slowly. "You'll get there," he added, almost as an afterthought. Then he turned and left. No refund demanded. No complaint. That was worse. Word spread anyway, it always did. Not in loud ways, in quiet ones. A man tries something, doesn't quite make it. Not yet. People notice. Marcus Doyle showed up 2 days later. He didn't belong to the forest the way the others did. That was obvious the moment he stepped out of his truck. Marcus was in his late 40s, tall, broad, with a controlled kind of strength that came from structure rather than labor. His dark hair was cut clean, precise. His jawline sharp, his expression sharper. No beard, no softness. His clothes were new, or close to it. A dark technical jacket fitted just right. Durable work pants, but factory-made. Boots that hadn't yet learned the ground they walked on. He walked into the forge like he already owned something in it. His eyes moved over everything once, then stopped on Caleb. "So you're the guy," Marcus said. Caleb didn't respond. Marcus smirked faintly. Heard you're trying to bring this place back. Trying, Caleb said. Marcus stepped closer to the anvil, tapping it lightly with one finger. People don't need this anymore, he said. Machines do it faster, cleaner, cheaper. Caleb leaned against the workbench, arms loose at his sides. Maybe, he said. Marcus tilted his head. No maybe about it. His gaze shifted briefly to Ranger. The dog didn't move, didn't react, just watched. Marcus looked back at Caleb. You're wasting time out here. Caleb met his eyes. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then Caleb said, quietly, then maybe people just forgot. Marcus's smile didn't change, but something in his eyes did. Not respect. Not yet. But interest. That night the forge sat cold. Caleb didn't light it, didn't touch the tools. He sat on the floor, back against the wall, staring at the darkened firepot. I don't think it's me, he said quietly. Ranger lay nearby, still, listening. Caleb exhaled slowly. Maybe I got it wrong. Silence, then. Ranger stood, not quickly, not sharply, just decisively. He walked past Caleb, past the tools, and stopped directly in front of the forge. He didn't bark, didn't move, just stood there, looking into the empty fire, waiting. Morning came colder than the day before. Caleb packed his things. Not much to gather. A few tools, clothes, the notebook. He moved through the motions with the same efficiency he had always relied on. No hesitation, no wasted movement. Ranger watched. Didn't interfere. Didn't stop him. Until the last moment. Caleb slung the bag over his shoulder and stepped toward the door. Come on, he said. Ranger didn't move. Caleb stopped, turned. The dog stood where he had been the night before, in front of the forge. Same position, same stillness. But now, his gaze shifted. Not toward Caleb, not outward, into the forge. Deep, focused. Caleb frowned. Ranger. Nothing. Move. Still nothing. The dog's posture didn't change, didn't soften, didn't yield. Caleb let out a slow breath. He had seen this before, in places where turning back meant survival, in moments where hesitation meant everything. Ranger wasn't disobeying. He was deciding. Caleb dropped the bag. It hit the ground with a dull thud. He ran a hand over his face, then looked around the forge again. At the anvil. The tools. The failed pieces stacked in the corner. The space that had already taken something from him and given something back. He shook his head slightly. Yeah, he muttered. You don't quit either. Caleb walked back to the forge. Slowly. Not forced. Not reluctant. Just accepting. He reached for the bellows handle. Paused. Then pulled. Air moved. The firepot stirred. Not alive yet. But not empty anymore. Ranger stepped back. Just enough. Satisfied. Caleb crouched down, placing kindling carefully, building the fire again, this time with less urgency, more attention. He didn't rush it, didn't force it. He let it take. Slowly, patiently. The flame caught, held, grew. Caleb leaned back slightly, watching it. Not smiling, not proud, just present. All right, he said quietly. Let's try again. Caleb didn't rush the fire anymore. That was the first thing that changed. He learned to wait. Not because he wanted to, but because the forge demanded it. Steel didn't care about urgency. It didn't bend faster because a man needed it to. It didn't forgive impatience. It simply responded. Or it didn't. The mornings came early. Colder now, the kind of cold that crept in through seams and settled into bone. Caleb would wake before the sun broke through the tree line, his breath visible in the dim light of the forge as he moved through the same quiet routine. Clear the fire pot. Check the bellows. Lay the kindling. Build the fire. No wasted motion. No hesitation. And Ranger would already be awake by then, sitting just outside the doorway, watching the horizon shift from gray to pale gold. His body remained still, but his awareness never dimmed. Every sound in the forest passed through him first. Footsteps, wind, distant engines. And if something didn't belong, he would know before Caleb ever had to ask. The first success didn't look like much. It was a hook. Simple. Curved wrong the first 3 times. Snapped on the 4th. Warped on the 5th. But on the 6th... It held. The curve settled naturally, the metal cooling without tension fractures, the shape clean and balanced. Not perfect, but right. And Caleb held it in his hand for a long moment, turning it slightly, feeling the weight settle into place. "Yeah," he said quietly. Ranger didn't react, but his tail shifted once against the ground. Work filled the gaps that failure used to occupy. Not just forge work, survival work. Caleb repaired fences for a farmer 2 miles down the road, rewelded cracked tractor joints, cut and stacked firewood for an elderly couple who paid him in cash and canned food. Each job added something small. Money, trust, time. He didn't speak much, didn't need to. People in that part of the world didn't measure a man by what he said. They measured him by what stayed fixed after he left. And one afternoon, a new visitor arrived. Not a customer. Not exactly. Her name was Lila Mercer. She came on foot, walking up the clearing with a steady, unhurried stride. She looked to be in her mid-30s, tall and composed, her posture straight without being rigid. Her dark coat, charcoal gray, tailored but practical, hung just below her knees, brushing lightly against her boots as she walked. Her hair was dark brown, pulled back loosely, a few strands escaping around her face, softening the otherwise sharp lines of her features. Her eyes were observant, not curious in a casual way, but deliberate, like she was used to understanding things before speaking about them. Ranger noticed her before Caleb did. The dog stood, moving forward just enough to intercept her path without blocking it completely. Lila stopped a few feet away, didn't step back, didn't reach out. She simply looked at Ranger and said calmly, "You decide who comes in, don't you?" Ranger didn't move, but he didn't object either. That was enough. Caleb stepped out from the forge. "Can I help you?" he asked. Lila shifted her attention to him, giving a small nod. "I've heard about the forge," she said, "and the man trying to bring it back." Caleb wiped his hands on a cloth, expression unreadable. Still trying." Lila's gaze moved past him briefly, taking in the anvil, the tools, the workbench. "Good," she said. "That's usually how it starts." She explained her reason for coming. A property she managed, a small woodland retreat farther north, had an old iron sign at its entrance. It had fallen, bent beyond simple repair. "I could replace it," she said. "Order something new, clean, perfect." She paused, then added, "But that wouldn't be the same." Caleb studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "Bring it," he said. That evening, as the light faded and the forest settled into its quieter rhythms, Caleb worked alone. Ranger had taken his usual place by the doorway, half-shadowed, watching both inside and out. The piece Lila had described wasn't here yet. So Caleb worked on something else. A hinge. Simple. Controlled. He heated the steel carefully, watching the color, not forcing it, not pushing it past the point of return. When it reached the right shade, deep orange, just before the edge of yellow, he pulled it from the fire and set it on the anvil. The hammer came down. Once. Twice. Then he stopped. Not because something went wrong, because something felt familiar. The angle. The resistance. The way the metal responded, not fighting him, not collapsing, but guiding. Caleb frowned slightly and adjusted his grip, struck again. And for a brief moment, it felt like he wasn't the one deciding the shape, like the movement already existed, and he was just following it. Ranger lifted his head, watching, not the steel, not the fire. Caleb. The feeling passed, quick, uncertain. Caleb stepped back, exhaling slowly. "Just focus," he muttered. But the hinge in his hand was the cleanest piece he had made yet. Days turned into weeks. The work improved. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. The kind of improvement that didn't announce itself, but stayed. Daniel Pike returned. This time he didn't bring a complaint. He brought another order. "Gates holding," he said simply. "Need a second one." Caleb nodded. No words exchanged. None needed. Marcus Doyle came back too. He didn't step inside the forge this time, just stood at the edge of the clearing, arms crossed, watching. His expression hadn't softened. But it had changed. Less certainty, more calculation. Caleb didn't acknowledge him, not directly. He just kept working. That was answer enough. Grace arrived one morning with a project. A wooden sign from the edge of a forest preserve, its iron brackets rusted, its supports broken. "We're restoring the trail entrance," she said. "Figured if this place is coming back." She gestured lightly to the forge. Might as well do it right." Caleb ran his hand over the rusted iron. Old work, good work, worth saving. "I'll take it," he said. Arthur returned later that week. He didn't call ahead, didn't announce himself, just drove up in his old truck, engine rattling slightly as it idled in the clearing. He stepped out slower than before, his movements more deliberate, but his eyes just as sharp. In his hands, he carried a wooden box. Small, worn. He walked straight into the forge and set it on the workbench without a word. Caleb looked at him. Arthur nodded once. "Found it in storage," he said. Caleb opened the box. Inside was a hammer, different from the others. Older, and the handle had been replaced more than once. The head bore marks not just of use, but of years of use. Caleb's jaw tightened slightly. "My father's," he said. Arthur shrugged lightly. "Figured you might want it back." For a moment, Caleb didn't speak, didn't move. He just stood there, looking at the hammer, at the worn grip where someone else's hand had once held it the same way. Then he picked it up, tested the weight. Familiar. Not because he remembered using it, because he remembered watching it being used. 3 hammers now hung on the wall, Elias's, Caleb's, and his father's. 3 different lives, same work, same place. That night, Caleb stood alone in the forge again, and the fire burned steady. The tools hung where they belonged. The workbench held pieces that no longer needed to be discarded. Ranger lay near the door, eyes half closed, but present as always. Caleb rested the hammer lightly against the anvil. Not striking, just placing it there. He looked around the space. Not empty anymore. Not waiting. Working. He exhaled slowly, then said almost to himself, "Yeah." A pause. Then, "I get it now." The forge cooled slowly that evening. Not in a rush, not with a sudden loss of heat, but in a steady retreat, like breath leaving a body that had learned to live again. The last embers pulsed faintly inside the firepot. A deep orange fading toward gray, the heat still present but no longer demanding attention. Caleb sat on a low stool across from it, forearms resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped together. Ranger lay beside him. Not asleep, never quite asleep. The German shepherd's body stretched comfortably along the packed earth floor, but his head remained lifted slightly, ears angled just enough to catch anything that might shift in the world beyond the walls. and his breathing was slow and even, steady as a metronome marking time. Outside, the forest had settled. No wind, no movement. Just the quiet presence of trees that had been there long before either of them, and would remain long after. The forge behind Caleb wasn't empty anymore. It had become something else. Not just a place to work, a place to continue. On the wall, 3 tools hung where the light from the small oil lamp caught them just enough to define their shapes. Elias Boone's hammer, broad-headed, worn smooth by a lifetime of repetition. Caleb's own working tools, newer, but already bearing the marks of use, of mistakes corrected and lessons learned. And between them, the hammer Arthur had brought, his father's. The handle carried the imprint of another man's grip, another life's rhythm, now intersecting with his own. 3 different hands, 3 different times. Same work, same place. Caleb reached forward and picked up the final piece he had been working on that day. It was simple, intentionally so. A wall hook, nothing more than curved steel shaped to hold weight without complaint. But this one was different. Not in size, not in function, in meaning. He had taken his time with it, heated it evenly, worked the curve slowly, allowing the metal to guide rather than resist. The edges were clean, the structure balanced, thus it didn't bend under pressure, didn't twist out of alignment. It held. Caleb turned it slightly in his hand. The surface wasn't polished smooth. It didn't need to be. But it carried the marks of deliberate strikes, each one placed with purpose. Near the base, just before the mounting point, he had etched something small, a symbol, minimal, clean, a simple line forming the outline of a K9 insignia, not decorative, recognizable, to those who knew. Footsteps approached from outside, light, measured. Caleb didn't turn immediately. He already knew who it was. Grace Whitaker stepped into the doorway, pausing just long enough to adjust her eyes to the lower light inside. She carried no paperwork this time. No project pieces, just herself. Her parka was unzipped, revealing the gray sweater beneath. Her hair was tied back loosely, a few strands falling across her face from the walk through the trees. She looked around quietly, taking it in. Not the way someone inspected something new, but the way someone acknowledged something that had changed. "You stayed," she said. Caleb nodded once. "Yeah." Grace stepped inside, boots making soft contact with the floor. Her gaze moved to the wall, the tools, then to Caleb. "You made progress," she added. "Some?" She tilted her head slightly, studying the piece in his hand. "What's that?" Caleb held it up briefly. Just a hook." Grace stepped closer, looked at it more carefully, then noticed the mark. Her expression shifted, not dramatically, but enough. "That yours?" she asked. Caleb nodded. Grace's eyes lingered on it for a moment longer. "Sell it?" she asked. Caleb shook his head. "This one is not for sale." He didn't explain, didn't need to. Grace didn't press. She simply nodded once, as if she understood something beyond the words. Ranger rose slowly to his feet. Not because of Grace, not because of sound, because of something else. He stepped forward, moving past Caleb, and stopped directly beneath the wall where the tools hung. His gaze lifted upward, fixed, still, not at one hammer, not at one object, at all of them, as a whole. For a moment, Caleb followed the dog's line of sight. The 3 tools, different shapes, different histories, hanging together. And in that quiet space, something settled, not as a thought, not as a realization, but as a feeling that didn't need explanation. Grace noticed it too. She didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, watching the same point, as if something unspoken had passed between all of them. Then Ranger exhaled softly and stepped back. The moment ended, but it didn't disappear. Caleb stood and crossed the room. He reached for the wall and drove the hook into place carefully, securing it into the wood with slow, deliberate pressure. It held, firm, reliable. He stepped back, studying it for a second, not checking for flaws, acknowledging completion. Grace leaned lightly against the workbench. "People are talking," she said. Caleb glanced at her. "About what?" "This place," she replied. "About you." Caleb shrugged. "They can." Grace's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. "They're starting to come back." "Good. They're starting to believe it again." Caleb paused. "What?" he asked. Grace gestured slightly toward the forge. "This," she said. "A work that lasts." Outside, a truck engine rumbled faintly in the distance, not close, not immediate, but present. Caleb didn't react. Didn't need to. Some things didn't require attention unless they became necessary. Grace pushed off the workbench and stepped back toward the doorway. She paused there, glancing once more at the hook on the wall, then at Caleb. "You didn't just fix the place," she said. Caleb didn't respond. Grace nodded once, as if confirming her own thought. Then she turned and stepped outside, leaving the door open behind her. The forge settled into silence again, but not the same silence as before. This one wasn't waiting. It was resting. Caleb sat back down. Ranger returned to his place beside him, lowering himself slowly to the ground. The dog's eyes flicked once toward the hook, then back to the fire, always aware, always present. Caleb leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees again. For a long time he said nothing, did nothing, just listened, to the faint crackle of cooling ash, to the quiet breathing of the dog beside him, to the absence of something that used to fill his head, and no longer did. He reached out and tapped the anvil lightly with his knuckle. The sound rang out, clear, steady, the same tone it had carried from the beginning. But now, it felt different. Not foreign, not distant. Familiar, owned. "Bapto?" Caleb exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he murmured. Not to anyone, not to anything, just acknowledgement. He looked around the forge one last time. The walls, the tools, the work, everything that had once been left behind. Now, continuing. He understood something now, not as a lesson, not as an idea, as truth. Work like this didn't disappear. It didn't end. It waited. In places, people stopped looking. In tools, people forgot how to use. In hands that hadn't found their purpose yet. It waited. Caleb didn't find the forge. The forge had waited for him. Ranger shifted slightly, resting his head back on his paws, eyes still open, watching, not guarding, not searching, just present. And somewhere beyond the trees, beyond the road, beyond the life Caleb had left behind, the world kept moving. But here, in this small, quiet place, something had stopped. Long enough to begin again. Sometimes, what feels like being cast out is not rejection at all, but redirection. Caleb thought he had lost everything the day the door closed behind him. But what he didn't know was that something greater had already prepared a place for him. A place hidden, protected, and waiting until the right moment and the right heart arrived. Maybe that is how God works. Not always in loud miracles, not always in ways we immediately understand, but in quiet paths, in closed doors that guide us forward, in unseen hands that place us exactly where we are meant to be. That old forge did not survive by accident. It endured. It waited. And when Caleb stepped into Edna's, he wasn't just rebuilding a place. He was stepping into a purpose that had been set aside for him long before he ever knew he needed it. And Ranger, sometimes God sends guidance in forms we don't question. Loyalty, instinct, a presence that stays when everything else falls away. Not to lead with words, but to stand firm when we are ready to give up. In our own lives, we all face moments like that. Moments when something is taken from us. When we feel lost, when nothing makes sense. But maybe, just maybe, those are the moments where something better is already waiting ahead. Trust that. Trust that even when you cannot see the path, there is one. Trust that what is meant for you will not miss you. And trust that God has not forgotten you. If this story touched something in your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who might need to hear it today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, or what part of your life you're still trying to understand. And if you believe in stories about second chances, purpose, and quiet miracles, subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories so you don't miss the next one. May God watch over you, guide your steps, and bless you with strength in the moments you need it most.